Hello and welcome to Rappler Talk. My name is Amanda Lago and we're here today to talk about something that's been at the center of discussions all month, Pride. And it is Pride Month, of course, but beyond the rainbows and all the fun and the glamour, let's go deeper into the issues that the LGBTIQ plus community is facing today. So to help us make sense of all of this and understand it more, we have a panel made up of Ryan Silverio from the ASEAN Soji Caucus. It's an organization that aims to advance LGBTIQ plus rights in Southeast Asia. We have Nikki Castillo from Metro Manila Pride, which is the longest running Pride celebration in the country, right? And LJ Bernardo, from Rainbow Rights Philippines, a legal and policy advocacy group that supports LGBTIQ plus individuals. Hi guys.
Hi. Good morning.
Welcome to Rappler. How are you?
Good.
Okay. Good. So let's talk about the LGBTIQ plus community in the Philippines right now. The Philippines, just to throw some stats out there, we've been ranked as one of the most gay-friendly countries in the world, according to a study by the Pew Research Center. 73% of Filipinos apparently believe that homosexuality should be accepted by society. Metro Manila Pride, of course, is a record holder. Last year, you had 25,000
yeah.
attendees. So these, on paper, the numbers look great.
Yeah.
But maybe you can illustrate what it really is like in real life, beyond the numbers. Ryan.
I think, Amanda, being LGBT is really colorful in the Philippines. You can walk outside, you can be comfortable with yourself, confident with yourself, being who you are. But if you go to some spaces, especially when close to heart, like in the families, there are a lot of families who are still kind of conservative with regards to our own identities. But I think if you're going to look at it in a broader picture, in the Philippines, we're kind of fine. But outside the Philippines, like in Southeast Asia, you've got countries that criminalize LGBT persons. You've got Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. So I think we're pretty okay, but not that fully okay.
Yeah, like
We still have a lot of work.
Yeah, actually, I want to build on what Ryan said as well about looking at the bigger picture. If we just look at those two things, those two numbers, then it looks like we're all okay here. But it's important to remember that the numbers for Metro Manila Pride is just Metro Manila. The rest of the Philippines, there are some Pride demonstrations in other parts of the Philippines. But if you go into, for example, the more far-flung areas, there's still a lot of conservative ideas and behaviors around, accepting or even in the level of just tolerating LGBTQIA plus people. We're not all there yet, and it's evident in not just the lack of legislation around the country, but also the culture that's pervasive, that's very clearly anti-LGBTQIA, and it's a colorful community, but it's not all happiness and celebration. There's still a lot of folks there who are struggling because of the reality of the society that we live in.
Yeah, just to build on that as well. In the Philippines, like there are still layers and layers of discrimination within the community. It could go from navigating a socially very awkward conversation with your family to protecting your life from people who might be aggressive towards people of LGBTIQ community. So it's a whole gamut of struggles as well, and we also have to bring that to fore. Research is saying that friendly needs to be nuanced and needs to be contextualized in the Philippines.
Because friendly could be like, you're my new best friend.
Just being comfortable, but not really looking at the struggles that person is going through.
So you said there's a whole range of issues that LGBTQIA plus individuals face every day. So can you give examples? What are the most prominent issues that here in the Philippines that they face?
Yeah, I think, for example, school bullying, corporal punishment within the family, and these are quiet issues that are being endured by LGBT children And I hope both LGBT groups and child rights groups can jointly address these issues. I know, for example, that in the Philippines we have the anti-bullying law that already exists, and gender-based bullying in its implementing rules and regulations includes sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's already an opening, and we want government to fully implement it so that schools within the country are safe spaces for LGBT children.
Yeah. So there's still a high incidence of these.
Yeah, there was.
This
I think
bullying.
there was a report prepared by government a couple of years back, and there were some cases of children reporting being harassed, being abused in schools because of who they are.
It's terrible.
Yeah, building on again what Ryan said, there's this sustaining study that Metro Manila Pride and Rain Bright has been doing for the last 2 years at Pride about a number of issues, and one of the questions is about discrimination, and we've found consistently in the last 2 years that the discrimination that LGBTQIA+ attendees experience is highest in schools and public schools in particular. But not just that, there's also studies from other organizations in the past, and it's consistent. The discrimination that happens on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression and sex characteristics always starts and is the most violent at home.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, and we don't even see these things most
Yeah.
of the time. It's great sometimes when students are able to report them. Not all of them are able to because they're scared, of course, because they're kids.
And if it starts at home, that's very
yeah,
hard to.
at home, it's
to
completely not
regulate,
visible
yeah.
unless there are scars on their body or something. But if it's at home, then it's probably unreported. It goes unreported. So.
And part of that, the community is invisible also in our laws.
Yeah.
There is no mention of LGBT people in most of our laws, except for one, I guess, that recently passed sexual harassment in public spaces law, where there's a vilification of LGBTIQ people is also penalized. But in general, in our legal framework, building on the invisibilization of the community, so we cannot really address it if our laws do not have even a single mention of LGBTIQ community or there's a mention in the family code.
Yeah.
However, it's
In a negative light.
In a negative light.
Yeah.
But as you can see, we are remembered. The community is remembered
Yeah.
when something is gonna be punished or prohibited, like in the family code. So there.
What do you mean the community is remembered?
That's an observation
Yeah.
that whenever something is, for example, in the family code, homosexuality and lesbianism are grounds for legal separation and annulment under fraud. So,
Under fraud.
yeah, when you conceal your homosexuality and lesbianism. So in that light, surprisingly, legislators remembered that there are people who are of diverse sexual orientations. But and what we want laws to, and we want the legislators also to remember us when they want to give us rights.
Yeah. For example, remember the My Husband's Lover bill that some legislators tried to pass before, so that we could also be included in discussions around adultery. See, again, we remembered when it's to punish us. But when it's for us asking for equal protection under the law, or things that will help alleviate the suffering of a marginalized community, we are ignored.
Yeah. So, given all this, I guess we can say that acceptance is not really, where we are in terms of acceptances.
Yeah.
We're still not there.
No.
Now we have a way to go. Like you guys said, actually, like again, to throw out some stats, the Philippines holds the highest number of transphobic killings in Southeast Asia. So that's alarming. And again, LGBT is an entire spectrum, right? And I think a lot of us mistake or seem to be single-minded about accepting. Like, we only accept lesbians, we only accept gays. We don't, there's no across-the-board acceptance of all individuals, right? As evidenced by the stats that you mentioned and the things that you mentioned. So what else makes the LGBTQIA plus community particularly vulnerable here? What do you think?
Stigma,
Yeah.
stereotypes that are pervasive and unfair and not evidence-based.
Yeah.
We have to combat that, and that puts us in a lot of danger whenever there's this pervasive stigma that the LGBT people are hypersexual.
Yeah.
Like if we are given rights, we are gonna sexually assault everyone. But that's not true. That's not evidence-based at all.
Right.
But it's coded in our minds, and we have to break that. And that's one of the reasons why we are being discriminated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just one. Just one.
Yeah. It's one, but I feel like it's the root of everything. The
Yeah.
stigma, the stereotypes, a lot of it, which stems from conservative religious beliefs. That one thing that LJ mentioned, you can trace almost everything just to those things because of the pervasive stigma and the stereotypes. It results in lack of protective legislation. It results in a culture that is so unaccepting and even violent. But it's also interesting to note, you mentioned a while ago that we have the highest number of documented anti-trans killings in Southeast Asia. But I think Ryan would probably be able to tell you more about how maybe it's because in other Southeast Asian countries it might just be not documented.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think there's this concept of gender policing that exists, and it's not just applicable to LGBT people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, if you're a woman or if you're a man, if you go beyond what's expected of you,
Right.
like if you wear a skirt or if you're a pants, you'll get harassed. I mean, you'll be punished in schools, and it happens to us as well.
Yeah.
This notion of like the gender binary, which is strictly enforced in many
Yeah.
social institutions like schools.
Yeah.
yeah, essentially misogyny. So the misogyny that affects women is the same thing that also oppresses the LGBTQIA plus community. Because why are gay men ostracized or discriminated against? Because you're very feminine, or you're very loud. You wear makeup, therefore you're not somebody to be accepted. So it all stems from misogyny.
It's like how they can't imagine why someone who's born a man, could ever want to present as
Right.
a woman.
Anything that isn't what a stereotypical cisgender heterosexual man would deem to be acceptable for them, then that's unacceptable. So
Yeah. So speaking of stigma and misconceptions about LGBTQIA plus individuals, earlier this year, the president himself made a remark that implied that homosexuality is a disease. How do statements like that affect the community?
let's take it first.
Me, I was so surprised because 2017, when the Philippines was reviewed by the Human Rights Council, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs at the time said to the entire members of the Human Rights Council that the current administration respects the rights of everybody, including LGBT persons. And then a few months later, you will have these homophobic remarks. It gives a sense of uncertainty what really this government is, pushing forward.
Yeah. Anytime anybody influential says something like that, it's detrimental to the community, but even more so those who are the marginalized within our community. Young LGBTQIA plus people who look up to people like the president and see him as their hero or their savior, just because he's the president, he holds the highest office in the country. And for them to be told that you are actually a disease-laden person, we don't know exactly how that will affect kids who hear that, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be in a positive light. And it also sets back our movement or the activism on the ground, because these are things that we try to correct in culture, but to hear it, reinforced all across media from the podium of the president, it's just, it makes our job difficult, and it endangers so many LGBTQI plus people because they can use these words to say, you're sick, so I can do whatever I want to because this is what has been told to me by somebody very influential. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It highlights the road that we have to go pa.
Yeah.
The length that we have to go through. Ibig sabihin, I guess it also shows that even if you are a person of that stature, you're a president of a country, or you're someone even in the academia, we've heard a lot of people who say this dangerous things. So I think it goes to show na your position or your level of education, you can still be educated.
Yeah.
And marami pa sa Pilipinas ang kailangan i-educate.
You know,
President.
a few years back, when a famous senator said that LGBT persons are worse than animals.
Yes.
When we had interviews with LGBT children, one kid said, "Nako, pinagbabawalan na kami maging LGBT kasi baka mapakiyaw kami."
Oh no.
Yeah.
Which is a sad, I mean, it's a sad implication of how these statements of political figures would deeply affect people's hearts.
And even when it's told in a joke, it's not always accepted or received as a joke by everybody else because jokes, I know we have you saying jokes are half meant.
Yeah.
It's the other half that is meant that is crucial here
Yeah.
Yes.
because it does affect culture, as we've seen from interviews with what happened to Pacquiao and how people are receiving this kind of statement. So.
And it's even more dangerous, right? If it's meant to make people laugh, it's
Exactly.
Yep.
like more,
Yeah.
I guess, hits you deeper because
Yes. It's a double whammy.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
now a joke and also a disease.
yeah. So in the face of that, like these powerful people hurling all these statements, and not just them, but normal people also have their own discriminatory opinions. In the face of that, what can we do to curb that stigma or to work our way through all these misconceptions?
There's a lot to be done.
Like as a normal everyday person.
Right. Well, I think, at least at Metro Manila Pride, we believe that we need to be working at two levels, at the legislative and policy level, and also at the cultural level. Because even if you have policies in place, but culture doesn't change, then there's going to be a clash there. This is actually something that we picked up from Galang Philippines, which is an organization that works with urban poor lesbians, bisexuals, and trans men. They call it the bibingka method, where you apply pressure or heat in the top and the bottom. So it's important to work with laws, but also to sit down with communities and groups and educate them at that level as well, because especially now we're seeing the SOGI Equality Bill or the Anti-Discrimination Bill. This year it's 19 years, right?
Yes.
It's 19. We've been lobbying for it for 19 years. And last year it made history because it passed at the House of Representatives.
Without objection.
Without unanimously,
Unanimous,
right?
yeah.
Not anonymously. But it also made history at the Senate because it's now the longest ever bill that has been stuck in the period of debates.
Right.
But since it didn't pass at the level of the Senate, we're back to square one now. So we think that there needs to be collective action from individuals as well to push for these laws, to make their legislators accountable for the laws that need to be done. But not only that, try to open up conversations around the water cooler, the dinner table, the tambayan in your orgs. And try to open conversations. You don't necessarily have to whip out the PowerPoint presentation.
This is why we
Right, exactly. It just needs to be like a personal one-on-one conversation and
Right.
trying to dispel the myths, the stereotypes, and try to have them understand this is why the laws are needed. This is why the jokes need to stop.
Yeah.
This is why policies in corporations, in schools need to change, because our reality is it's this. You're not accepted. There's so much discrimination, and people die because of it. So
So something as simple as having a conversation about
it's important.
it
Yes.
can go a long
Even
way.
bettering oneself.
Yeah.
Like reading up on these things. Why is it important? I think that's very that impacts the community. And if as what Nikki told us, like the conversation, if those conversations could be guided by that deeper knowledge, that would be really, really better
Yes.
for the advocacy as well.
Yeah. And empower activists to continue to engage with government,
Yes.
thought leaders, educators. I'm also a teacher myself, so I try as much as possible to infuse discussions on LGBT matters in whatever topics I would discuss in class, and at the same time also build new leaders for sustainability of the movement. It's very important because we can be here talking about LGBT rights, acting on LGBT rights now, but who's going to continue this fight in a couple of years from now? It's going to be an uphill struggle, a sustained struggle.
So it has to be nurturing the next generation of,
Yeah.
of
Absolutely.
activists as
Yeah,
well.
because it can't die out with us. I mean,
Yeah.
and like of the population of LGBTQI plus people in the country, the activists are like a small percentage.
Yeah.
So it's really important to pass on that knowledge and make sure that when folks can't do it anymore, where they're in a position where they can't do it anymore, those coming up after us know that this is what has been done, this is what it's doing now, and this is where we need to go, so that we can reach our goals.
Yeah. LG, you mentioned earlier educating yourself,
Yeah.
which I think is very important because if you want to support, the community, you have to know what you're talking about, right? So,
But also to temper that. Also be welcoming.
Ah.
And a lot of people are afraid of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
of somewhat toxic culture in social media.
call
like-
out culture.
Yeah, call out
Yeah.
culture.
Cancel
but
culture.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes as well. I mean,
Yeah.
But continue that path of learning and remember that the community is very welcoming.
Yeah.
It will not crucify you for a mistake. And actually, we made mistakes. I know. I don't know. I've made mistakes before, and I admitted that, and that's part of learning.
So despite this whole cancel culture that you see on, I mean, you say people don't crucify, but on Twitter, oh my God, everyone's like, oh, so angry when someone says something that's a
Right.
bit off. So,
I think I actually think that just like the term woke, the cancel culture has been misused.
Yeah.
The term and the tool of calling out has been misused. We need to call out people when they make mistakes,
Yes.
but only when there is an issue of power imbalance. For example, if it was Senator Pacquiao who did these statements, and it's just an ordinary citizen, they have no way to directly reach
Right.
Senator Pacquiao. Then the only recourse then is to use public platforms and call them out. But if it's somebody you know personally, for example, it's a friend, you don't go on Twitter and say, "Hey, my best friend said this, they're canceled,"
Yeah.
because then you have completely missed the objective of calling out, which is to educate. If you do this, and you do have a direct line, there's no power imbalance there because they're a peer, then parang your objective of doing that becomes just because you want to fight somebody
Yeah.
or you just want to get the clout.
Yeah.
So then calling out is important, but the objective or the aim needs to be to educate and to get folks to understand and be on your side.
Yeah.
There's actually a recent example. It was a few months back. Quest said something. The
Right,
musician
yeah.
said something that was very anti-LGBTQIA+. And a lot of folks were in his mentions and trying to educate him.
Yeah.
And of course, there were folks who were really mad, and a lot of people said a lot of bad things as well and got really personal. But there were so many in his mentions trying to educate him very, very patiently.
Yeah.
But because they were just fans or just regular citizens, he really wasn't listening.
Right.
But when Sab Magalona, who is a
Yes,
peer and is an ally of the community, used her platform and her relationship with him as a peer to educate him as an ally of the community, he started listening.
Yeah.
So that's when we see, that's the difference.
Yeah.
So if you want to educate, then calling out is important, but you need to know when to call out and when to call in.
Right.
Call in your peer, call out somebody
Yeah.
who has more power than
I
you.
love that.
Yeah.
Call out versus call in.
Yeah.
I think we need more of that actually, because how far are we gonna go if everyone's just fighting? So education is very
We have conversations with fellow activists. You keep on telling them we are not here just to fight people. We are here to win allies.
Yes.
So the
Yes.
crucial thing is to have creative and safe spaces for meaningful conversations. Like for example, some people are quite sensitive, like how are we going to refer to person's pronouns?
Yeah.
So we teach them how is it to ask a person's pronoun in a respectful way, or ask a person how he or she wants to be identified. It's good to have this kind of questioning become normal, because you put the spot on a person, you give the person a chance to determine himself or herself.
Yeah.
You just need to be open to learn. And I think this is actually a term that I learned from Ryan and also from Naomi Fontanos from Ganda Filipinas. Reflexive learning and reflexive
activism.
reflexive, not reflective.
Academic terms.
Right. Oh, see, it's an academic. So I think Ryan probably can talk more about reflexive activism.
So
activism. Okay.
kumbaga parang parati mong pinag-aaralan kung ano yung ginagawa mo, and you learn lessons out of it, and be mindful where you are coming from, because some of us may be talking about and acting from a position of privilege.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, for example, it matters sa usapin ng lingwahe. We might be talking about Soji using English, and then we are communicating to people who haven't perhaps reached high school.
Yes.
Right.
So always being mindful about all our actions.
Yeah.
And check your privilege.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So earlier you mentioned the SOGI Equality Bill, which it was not passed in the 17th Congress, despite the push for it by so many people. So, you know, the changing political landscape post-2019 midterm elections left a lot of members of the LGBTQIA+ community wondering what's next.
Right.
So what's going to happen now that the SOGI Equality Bill is back to square one?
Do you want to take this?
Happen now.
Do you want to take it?
I'm gonna refile it.
Yeah. So right now,
We're in the process.
the groups are in the process of,
Yes.
of regrouping, because we are back to square one at this point. And since there are all new faces in both houses, there needs to be, another mapping of who our allies are, where do they stand on crucial issues, and can we get them over to our side and to support us. So at the level of activism, that's what needs to be done. For ordinary citizens, I think it's really important for them to be very vigilant, especially with the new folks coming in. Let's try and see who are the folks who have said, for example, that they support education for all. Then that means also education for LGBTQIA+ people, which is in the SOGI Equality Bill, not blocking education on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So if a legislator has said, yes, para ako sa edukasyon, para sa lahat, then that means that on principle, shouldn't they be supporting the SOGI Equality Bill as well? So these kinds of things, like looking for those kinds of pronouncements from folks who are who are going to be in position once the 18th Congress sets in, it's important for them to check, this congressperson that I voted for, you said you were for education for all, then baka naman pwede niyo pong suportahan yung SOGI Equality Bill. Just for us to be vigilant, because this helps us as well. This helps people working on the ground. If you keep track of these things and keep the legislators accountable.
I'm curious, who does actually the approaching of all these people in power?
We have an alliance, Lagablab.
Network.
Lagablab Network, yeah. It's an alliance, but it does not stop the community groups to approach their legislators, to write them letters, to call them in their offices and say that we are for the SOGI Equality Bill. And that is one of the avenues where the community is working towards passing it eventually.
So even an ordinary citizen
Yeah.
can write a letter to
Yeah.
their
They should.
legislators.
That would be
And
great.
they
That's
should.
the idea.
Yeah,
Oo.
they should.
So that's something people can do, right?
Yeah,
And
because
to
sorry,
add
go
as
ahead.
well, there's another layer of legislation that there's a national
Yeah.
legislation, but there's also local. So if they want more the proximity and the closer legislators they have are their councillors, their
Yes.
local legislators, their board members. So that's another avenue that they can look at since the social equality bill is back in square one, is to pass their local anti-discrimination ordinances as well.
Yep.
And then also lobby our government officials to utilize the budget for
GAD.
gender and
Yeah.
development, the GAD
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah, there's a lot
Having
of misconceptions
resources is so
about that.
important.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, government agencies organizing discussions on SOGSC,
Yeah.
Yes.
educating officers and staff on sexual orientation, gender identity. These are very important tools
Yeah.
to create a different and transformative culture within
Yeah.
the civil service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really important that ordinary citizens do it, because something that has always been a criticism of activism on LGBTQIA+ rights is that we're a noisy minority.
Yeah.
They think it's just us wanting these things and that we haven't asked LGBTQIA+ folks on the ground experiencing these things that this is happening. They think it's just us. Nagpapa-special lang kami. But that's not the reality.
Yeah.
So it would be amazing if citizens can go to their local barangay halls, go to government offices, and then ask for these things that they need or that they would want their local government to represent them on. And also, because of the age of social media, a lot of the legislators on whatever level are very accessible through those means as well. Wag lang kayong mag-aaway. Oo, because they really shut down, and it's understandable naman. But make it constructive, and then they can say that, dear mayor or dear council member, this is something that has been happening. I've experienced this kind of discrimination, or my friend has, my brother has, you know, and it happens a lot in our area. Can we do something about it? Can we pass these laws that need to be in place? It doesn't even have to be your government. It can be in your own company.
Yeah.
You can write your HR, whoever is in power there, and say, these things are happening and we need policies in place. And you know, that matters because they need to hear that it's happening. If the reason why many folks in power are not receptive to us is because they think that we're making it all up. And we would need the help also of ordinary citizens if they're in a position where, you know, they can do it.
Yeah.
Sana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned you can write to like your company head or whatever, but what if they don't listen? What if they just ignore it and then you're okay, do whatever you want, leave the company if you feel discriminated against? What do you do? Where can you go? Is it
Yeah.
illegal now, like for someone to do
There's refuge in our laws in the labor code, but in the context of the community of LGBTQIA+, we have to really look pa and see saan nagpo-fall under yung if for example, if that person was illegally dismissed, we have to find the ground. It would have been better if we have a social equality bill that prohibits that outrightly. However, for the next step of that person, if that company is not listening, you have your advocacy groups and you can
Reach out.
reach out, and then maybe we can set up dialogues. That's one way. But there are a lot of ways. Then yun nga, you go to another person of power, maybe your mayor.
Yeah.
Hey, this company is kicking me out because
Of this,
Right.
because of my SOGI. So
Or
you find
approach
avenues of
approach the Commission on Human Rights.
human rights. Yeah.
Because they have the Gender Equality and Women's Rights program.
Right.
And so far, based on experience,
Yeah.
they've been quite receptive when
They
it comes
are.
to
They're a huge ally.
addressing LGBT
Yeah.
issues. Like, there was one case of a trans woman, as a student,
Yeah.
who was, pressured by the dean a few years back, and then we helped her seek recourse, CHR, and then they were able to send their staff and talk to the school officials, and the problem was quite resolved then.
Yeah. And also Banikadag, they helped Banikadag from her discrimination issue with a big corporation a few years ago. But also, this is where the beauty of anti-discrimination ordinances come in. For example, if this kind of discrimination happens in your workplace in Quezon City, because they have the ADO, the anti-discrimination ordinance, and they have passed their implementing rules and regulations for that ordinance, there are already mechanisms and steps in place for folks who experience discrimination on the basis of their SOGI to go to City Hall and to report that this has been happening, and there is legal recourse in that aspect. So that's why it's so beautiful that Quezon City and now Cebu City and Jensen apparently already has their IRR. But currently, there are 24 areas in the country that have anti-discrimination ordinances, and only these 3 have the IRRs. So. The way I always describe this is, for example, you buy a car. You buy a car and it comes with a user manual and you don't know how to drive, or you don't have to use the different components of the car. The ADO is your car. The user manual is the IRR, or the implementing rules and regulations. So without the IRR, the ADO is just a beautiful piece of legislation there in your local government unit. These areas need to be passing their IRR so that ordinary citizens can avail of, the recourse that they can get from the ADO. Right. So that in the absence of a national law, they don't have to go from one place to another. They can go directly to government and say, this is what's happening in my company. Can we please get some justice for this?
So there are things in place that people can. But I guess it only highlights the need for
the national law,
the
because
national
you don't have to do the maneuverings. You don't have to chop up the law and look for where do we fall here.
Correct.
Something more direct and something more enforceable is needed.
Right. So you mentioned earlier, people can write to their lawmakers. They can lobby for the government to pass these laws. What else can they do to push for the SOGI Equality Bill now that it's the 18th Congress about to begin and it's back to square one?
Be vocal.
Be vocal.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. They need to get their stories out there, I think. Another thing that lawmakers always ask us for is, where is the data? Where are the stories? Where are the numbers? And if communities are able to gather the stories, as long as they keep it anonymous, don't mention the company or the institution where the discrimination happened, and don't mention the names of the people. They can just say, this transgender person who is 18 years old was not allowed to march by their school for graduation because they were told that they have to cut their hair, they have to look like a man. And then compile this data, and they can put it out there themselves, or they can send it to organizations that push for the SOGI Equality Bill. And this helps, these kinds of things help. Because we don't have the resources to go all over the Philippines and knock on doors and do a census of what kind of discrimination that people experience. So this way, if folks can come to us with these stories, that will help immensely.
Okay. So compiling data.
Yeah.
Okay.
But keep it anonymous.
Yeah. It's interesting because at this point, it feels like if you're an ally, you just voice it out on Twitter or it doesn't feel like there are actual actions that you can do, but like you said, there are so many things pala that can be done.
They can also reach out to the organizations and say, how can I help? A lot of orgs need help because folks are in at least the community, not everybody is full-time. A lot of folks are just volunteers. LG is, I'm a volunteer as well. And because there just aren't a lot of resources for, to be a full-time activist. So if people want to start helping, they have the time or the resources to do it, then they can approach organizations and ask, how can I help exactly? And
simple as that.
Yeah.
So aside from the SOGI Equality Bill, what else is the LGBTQ plus agenda? This is the question.
Here we go.
You can say specific things like gender recognition.
Yeah.
That is very important. Hate crime legislation is
Yes.
very important. The thing is marriage equality eventually. Those are the more
Pressing issues,
apparent
yeah.
aspects of LGBTQIA rights that we are trying to achieve in the
Yeah.
near future, hopefully.
Yep, in terms of legislation, yeah. Yeah. Those are the legislations that we need, but maybe, Ryan, you have...
Creating more safe spaces for leadership. It's very interesting that in the Philippines, more and more local pride-based organizations, local LGBT organizations are sprouting here and there. In big cities like Iloilo, they have the Iloilo Pride Team. There's the Mindanao Pride Team. I think it's also about supporting movement building.
Yeah.
Right.
Providing resources for local LGBT activists to have even like small activities that eventually we can scale up.
Yeah.
So that's the agenda.
Yeah. The
So
agenda
kumbaga
is...
meron kang agenda sa legislation, sa
Yeah.
batas, may agenda
Sa
ka rin
kultura.
sa pagbuo ng movement
Yes.
mo.
It
Yeah.
really needs to be sabay. It really needs to be legislation, culture, or movement building, because it doesn't work any other way. Like, if it's just the movement building that's going on and hindi siya sinasabay ng legislation, then it's also difficult for us to move. The agenda, I think the agenda is for all persons, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or sex characteristics, to be able to live a life that is free from prejudice, free from discrimination and violence, just on the basis of their soji. That is like the bottom line agenda. People, we just want to be able to live without fear, love freely, and to just be able to live a dignified life where our human rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. That's it. Just like anybody else. That is the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it also spills over to other issues like
Yeah.
poverty,
Yes,
the
definitely.
whole gamut of human rights. And that's, I think if we're gonna add to the agenda, that is also,
Yeah.
we are inclusive, we embrace those, and we see them. If we empower them, we're also empowered.
Yeah, because there are LGBTQI plus people who are poor. There are
Correct.
those who are from indigenous people's communities. There are folks who are persons with disability, but also LGBTQI plus. And the kind of oppression that they experience is compounded
Yeah.
because of these different aspects or identities in their lives. So they're not just gay, you're also mahirap. So then you're oppressed because of both these things.
Yeah.
So it's important for us as advocates, as individuals, to reach out across sectors, because ultimately we're all just fighting for human rights.
Yeah.
So the more we are, the stronger we are, and we're going towards a united goal of folks being able to live a dignified life.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
So kumbaga
May-
there's
may
this
agenda
concept
na.
of
Agenda.
yung concept ng intersectionality.
Yes.
Yeah.
We really have to take it seriously
Yeah.
because all of us face multiple forms of discrimination, not
Yes.
just because of us being LGBT,
Yes.
because of varying social positions.
Yeah.
So that's it. Just equality across, no matter where you're from.
Yeah.
Human rights,
Yeah.
no matter what your situation
Just let
is.
folks live.
Yeah. Which should be the
But they
default
don't get it.
anyway.
Oo nga eh.
That's not how the world works.
Yeah.
So how do you rally, now that you have an agenda, how do we rally people to support that agenda? How do we get allies to support that?
We have discussions with different sectoral groups, child rights groups, women's rights groups, groups working on the rights of persons with disability,
Disabilities.
the elderly. As simple as for them to understand what SOGSE means, for them to understand what LGBT is, what LGBT human rights are, and you know how our issues and their issues connect.
Yeah.
As basic as that,
Yeah.
and to get commitment. Okay, we're going to rally for a specific policy
Yeah.
or a bill. Can you support? Can you sign on, say, a joint statement
Yeah.
where both of us can put forward?
Solidarity in action. Like, it needs to be sama-sama tayo.
Yeah.
No, sama-sama tayo kasi isa lang naman yung pinaglalaban natin. Tapos, like what Ryan said, sometimes you do need to go in there and show them how exactly our struggles are connected, because sometimes it's not always apparent because of cultural stigma and stereotypes. But we have found that the allies just need to be hearing these things, and it's a quick turnaround for them to try to integrate SOGSE into their own work, for it to not be invisible anymore. I think allies, they're so important because there's more of them than there are of LGBTQI plus people. Their voices are so important. But it would be amazing if they could be open to learning more about the community. And when they do learn about the community, if they could lift up the voices of folks from the community and not speak over them. And also, like what LJ mentioned, to always remember that mistakes happen.
Yeah.
Even in our course of our career, of our lives as activists, we have made mistakes in the past. What's important is that first you acknowledge that you've made a mistake. You apologize publicly, and exactly not saying I'm sorry that you feel hurt. No, like say exactly I'm sorry
It's
that
not my intention.
right. It's not my intention, because impact trumps intent all the time.
Yeah.
So we need to be mindful of how what we say or what we do will impact a community. So like apologize sincerely and specifically for what it is that you did, and then just learn from that moving forward.
Right.
So we're trying to build a movement, and allies are part of it as well. So importante lang that we keep learning from each other. We keep each other accountable,
Yeah.
so that we can lift each other up as well.
Yeah.
In some activist trainings, we teach this term, stepping forward, stepping backward. So for allies, step forward if you've got the influence. Speak, create a buzz about LGBT rights. And then, but when the buzz is already there, step back. Create a space for LGBT persons to speak about their own issues.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's an interesting point, because it's so easy to like virtue signal, like yes, I'm an ally, but then you're still the center of the conversation.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Like
So-
for example, there are no trans people on this on these couches, so we can only maybe talk about a little bit about what they experience, but the space to talk about the depth and intensity of the issues that they experience should be a space given to trans people,
Right.
because they know it's their lived experience.
Right.
So for us to be very genuine about our allyship, we need to, like Ryan said, step back and give the space to the folks who have lived these things.
So like you said, don't speak over them.
Exactly.
Raise their voices.
And
Amplify
even
their voices.
amongst the LGBTIQ
Yes.
movement,
Yes.
we also need to be mindful that there are subgroups that are left behind.
Yeah.
For example, intersex persons. Like our organization, we're very conscious about giving them opportunities, supporting their initiatives, so they can be empowered to do their advocacy work.
So there are so many subgroups, like you mentioned. I mean, it's a whole spectrum. And then we have the allies. How do we unite this whole community under the agenda?
Mahirap na patanong.
How I wish we have like regular national conferences where different groups
Yeah.
can come
Maybe
together
there should
and
be. Why isn't
sit
there
down.
one?
I know there were some in the past.
There were some in the past, yeah. But, I think like we just need to get behind the goal. It would be difficult to get everybody under the same roof. It's a dream, of course, but then of course there are some issues like resources that we would need to hurdle. But just to get everybody together behind that united goal, I think is the first step, and it's really, really important.
And I think that's something that Metro Manila Pride has done. You did crowdfunding, right? For the Pride
Yeah.
Parade.
I think it's important to note that like Metro Manila Pride is just one aspect of what the whole movement is trying to do. it's amazing because the folks that come to Metro Manila Pride, a lot of them do not have their own groups, or they've never been they don't belong to human rights groups. They're unaffiliated individuals, and when they get there, they learn and they get exposed to the different issues that they actually is pervasive in the community. So that's an amazing space. So in Pride, what we try to do is to get folks to understand that Pride, as much as it's a celebration, it is also a protest, because our very existence as LGBTQIA plus people in a society that discriminates us and oppresses us like this is in itself a protest. And the roots of Pride here in the Philippines and even in the States, the Stonewall riots from 50 years ago, the roots of it is a protest. So Pride is a celebration, yes. It's a protest, yes. It is community, yes. It is solidarity in action. It doesn't, and it shouldn't stop after that one day of you waving your flags and marching with other human rights groups. It needs to continue when you get home, when you get to your work, when you log on to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And it shouldn't stop with just a rainbow filter or that rainbow, photo at Pride. It needs to seep into the different parts of your circles. And also maybe try to step out of your circles. Go to communities like urban communities of Galang Philippines. Go to rural areas and reach out to Iloilo Pride or to Mindanao Pride. So all of these different things is important. We need to remember that it's not just that one day. There are so many other things happening, and we need your presence there too. We need your voices there too. You can be waving your flags there as well, and we'll welcome you with open arms. But just
it has to go beyond.
It has to go beyond.
Yeah. So what does Pride mean? Like you said, it's a protest, it's a celebration, it's community. What else is it? What does it mean to the LGBTQ plus community?
Personally, I think Pride is about you yourself. You're confident with who you are, your sexuality, your gender identity. But it goes beyond. It has to transcend. It has to transcend through actions. Volunteer, sign petition letters, talk to your politicians, talk to your legislators. Take some small acts by educating your parents and friends.
Pride means you're not a person that is another person. I mean, less than human. So it means for me, just showing the world that we're also human and we deserve what you are experiencing or enjoying.
For me, so one of the things that we hear year after year is that at Pride, they wish Pride was every day. It's not logistically or financially possible. But when we ask why do you wish it were every day? It's because at Pride, even if you're in a sea of strangers, you finally feel at home. So Pride is that. It's home. We're family, and we need to be standing up for each other and moving together, doing all of the actions that was mentioned before, lifting each other up and resisting together. It needs to be together. Even if you're not physically together anymore, it still needs to be there. We need to be moving as a community.
That's true. Like Pride, it's like you don't know anyone, but then you go there and you're like, oh my God, everyone's giving out free hugs and just so much love going around. So if anyone wants to go, they should go.
Please go, yeah.
It's very
yes.
Yeah, inspiring experience, I think. I'm just curious, is it likely, do you guys think, since we were talking about having the same rights, like you mentioned LJ, having the same rights as everyone else, is it likely for the Philippines to pass a same-sex union bill anytime soon?
Legislation.
How close are we to that?
I can say, but if we are working on the destroying stereotypes, destroying prejudice in the communities, then that would be second nature or a knee-jerk reaction to that. If that truly happens on the ground, but personally, I don't want it to happen without the bibingka approach again. Because what if we have that and then it doesn't have that popular support and that
Yeah.
internalized na feeling na dapat nararapat na magpakasal din ang mga tao na diverse ang SOGI. So I can't tell, but if we're working, that's one of the goals. Promise.
I think, I mean, because a new Congress is coming in, then if anybody files a same-sex union bill, then it would again start from zero. But we would, and it's important for us to have this legislation, but in the spirit of what we've been discussing, reaching out across sectors, intersectionality, I think it's important that us as a community, we get behind the passage of the SOGI Equality Bill. Why? Because it protects everyone across the community. It protects you whether you're rich or you're middle class. Because paano ka nga naman kasi ikakasal kung kumakalam yung kalamnan mo? Diba? Dahil wala kang trabaho, dahil ayaw ka tanggapin dahil ikaw ay trans or tomboy or bakla. Or yun na nga, diba? So, we need to protect our community. There needs to be a blanket protection for our community first. Let's get behind that. Because, especially because the SOGI Equality Bill offers even more protection for those who are marginalized within our community. Tayo as middle class, of course, there are those within the middle class community who experience discrimination on the basis of SOGI in trying to get work or trying to graduate. But imagine how much more discrimination or how much more oppression that poor LGBT people have to struggle with, you know. So, mas importante for us to use our privilege to get behind a bill that protects the most marginalized of the marginalized. So, yeah.
I think that touches on like wrapping up, you know, this whole conversation we talked about. Intersectionality, working together, the things that people can do. So, what are the issues that we should all resist together? And how do we do that?
And that.
You know, in recent times, we have observed that there's backlash against human rights in general, in all of the countries globally. So, in the context of resist together, let us resist that.
Yeah.
Let us build more. Let us be aware that there is that the space for human rights is decreasing,
Yes.
and then siguro yun yung ipalakihan pa natin.
Because we all benefit from
Yeah.
from having more spaces, safe spaces for human rights. So yes, I agree with LJ. We need to resist the rollback of human rights and the decreasing spaces for human rights defenders as well, to fight for the rights that we need, especially the marginalized community.
Right.
Yeah.
Across the region, there's a growing trend of violent extremism.
Yeah.
We haven't experienced it clearly here in the Philippines, but in Indonesia, Malaysia, you've got like Islamist organizations really attacking activists. So yeah, strengthening our ranks, teaching each other how to defend ourselves online and in offline spaces, and aligning ourselves with the broader human rights movement is a very important part of the strategy.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a good way to end this discussion. I think we talked about so many things.
Yeah.
I feel so enlightened right now. So thank you guys for
Thank you for
sharing your
inviting us.
knowledge. That was a
Yeah.
very interesting discussion. And thank you everyone for tuning in. That was Rappler Talk. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride!
Yay.
Thank you.